Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi and I am honored today to be joined by former Derby football great as well as baseball great, the great number 48, Dave Anroman. And Dave, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor for me, so thank you for coming today.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
So Dave, let me ask you, you grew up in a family, your father, I believe, played for Derby around 1960, 1961. Very good football player, very good basketball player. So you kind of had a good idea as a young boy what Derby sports was all about, especially football, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, my father played back in the late 50s, early 60s. He had a few opportunities to go and play football in college. He opted to go in the military.
Right.
That was more prevalent back then, but it was a decision that he made for himself. But he did enjoy his time, playing football and basketball. I think he was a better basketball player, which he says. But
right.
he was also very good in football as well.
And I believe he played for Sam Palmucci when he played.
Yeah, Sam was a coach, I think along with Al Vitello, if
right.
I'm not mistaken.
And I believe Al was his basketball coach.
He was his basketball coach, yep. Sam was his football coach. I mean, Sam ended up being my guidance counselor.
Right,
yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And, you talk about basketball. Back then, Derby did a lot better than they, obviously do now. They had some pretty good players on that team. Did he play with Jimmy Bonanza?
Yeah, I think he did play with Jimmy. I know Bruce Sill,
right.
John Melania, which I went to school with his son Eric.
Right.
I want to say Sal Gradadori was on that team as well.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of good players. Sam Toney, I believe.
Yeah, good player.
Another
right.
good player. But yeah, they had a good team. They had a lot of wins back then. I think they had more wins probably in his senior year than Derby had in the last 20 years in basketball.
Wow.
But
right. So, as far as football went, I mean, you started when you were 9 years old, but let me ask you, when you were like 4 or 5 years old, I'm sure he was taking you and your brother John to games.
Yes. I think I was immersed into the program at a young age. I believe it was around 7 years old. A lot of people don't know, but my godfather was Ralph Bartone.
Right.
And his son Ron was playing on the '82 team.
Right.
So I went to all the games. And back then, being that young, I do remember, going to the Ansonia game. And but what really stuck out was I think going to the state championship game that year when they had the rematch against Ansonia.
Right.
Like I said, I was only 7 at the time, but I remember going to that game and I was sold. Right then and there, I wanted to play for
right.
Derby, and but I had to wait 2 years. Back then in the Pop Warner system, you weren't able to play until you were 9.
Right, because I think there was only Pee-wees, junior midgets, and midgets, correct?
That's it. You can play Pee-wees for that 3 years until you were 12. Then you would move on to the junior midgets, and then obviously once you get into high school.
Right.
So
let me ask you this. People don't realize, but you were a very talented basketball player and baseball player, real good Little League player, I believe, for the A's, correct?
Yes.
Right. But let me ask you, when you started football at 9, was football the sport for you even at that age? I mean, was that your number one before anything else?
I would say so. I mean, obviously I had such a love for football. I just love the camaraderie.
Right.
I love the intensity, of the sport. Nothing against baseball or basketball. I love playing. I just love just being out there playing, especially with my friends. I grew up with a lot of great friends. Playing with my brother, his friends. We formed a lot of good relationships. But football was definitely my first love.
Right.
So I dedicated a lot of time to that.
Right, and one of the things at the Derby games, which was a tradition, especially when the games were still on Saturdays, is kids, playing football while the game's going on. Whether it's right by the goalpost over there, whatever the case may be. But, you didn't just go to the games to watch. You kind of went there to, have your own touch football game. And a lot of times kids were playing tackle back then. So, I mean, that program really, at a young age for a lot of kids, it made kids want to be a part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I was a part when I was growing up during those years. I mean, Derby had a lot of great football teams. From '82 all the way up until 1990 when I was a sophomore. I mean, those were great years for Derby football. I remember, the '85 team, going to all those games. My parents were good friends with the Cerros. Mark at that time was the starting quarterback on that team. So, I mean, I was at every game. They were good friends with the Shays as well. Watching Danny, Danny play. I mean, he was a great lineman, great linebacker. I mean, they had a great team. And growing up watching those guys, watching how they played, learning from them,
right.
And those guys were great. I mean, I was able to spend a lot of time with those guys, and they taught me a lot.
Right.
And not just him. I mean, from the '86 team, Ronnie Benito, Chris King,
right.
A lot of those guys, Jimmy Lewis, hanging out with those guys, learning from them, watching them. And those guys were really great with the youth football program. I can't tell you how many times being at practice and those guys showing up,
Right.
helping us out with the drills. I had great coaches back then. Nick Rizzio that we
Right.
talked about, Barry McDermott.
And Barry was, he was a tough-nosed
He
football
was.
player as well as coach.
He was. I can't tell you how many times I went home crying and upset, for him screaming, yelling. I mean, there was no love lost there. I mean, he was there to teach you the game, not there to really pamper you and
Right.
baby you, which I can't tell you how much I appreciate now.
Right.
It's helped me carry on, throughout my life. I owe a lot to those guys.
Right. So you started at 9 years old, and you mentioned Barry and Coach Rizzio, and
Mm-hmm.
they were really tough, like you said. What, yelling aside and all that, how did you think you did your first year in Pop Warner? I mean, did you say to yourself, I do have the ability to do this? And were you a quarterback at first? Or?
Yeah, at first, I couldn't find my niche. Coach Rizzio, he would start me off, he tried to put me at quarterback. They had my brother and Jason in the backfield, so they wanted to get me in there to play. Then they put me at receiver. Then they put me a little bit at running back. I mean, he had me pretty much circling around, which I liked.
Right.
I was able to play in different positions and learn a lot of different positions, which helped me later on as I progressed in my career. But the first year was a learning curve. I would say. I mean, they spent a lot of time, with me, which really helped. A lot of times you see coaches, they just focus on the good players they
Right.
have, and the rest of the nucleus kind of gets pushed away on the wayside. But they really took the time and effort to help each individual player, which again it helped us later on.
Right. And the biggest thing, too, sometimes they don't get enough credit, but we'll get to your high school career, but all those, big tackles you made in your high school career and big runs and things like that, all that stuff that you did when you were in high school, they helped you because they taught you how to hit. They taught you how to form tackle, how to form block, all those things. Because, a lot of times if you come out freshman year, you really are behind as far as the game goes. So, I mean, they really had a big hand in how you performed in high school.
Yeah, no doubt. They had a huge impact. Like I said, by the time I got into high school, I was leap years ahead. I mean, we had a lot of guys that were just coming in. Maybe they were
Right.
too big, too small, or just didn't play football, and they would come in. I mean, growing up with a lot of my brother's friends and some of my sister's friends were 5, 6 years older than me. I mean, playing with those guys, learning from them, I mean, really helped me achieve a lot that I did achieve in high school.
Right. And now let me ask you, your first year, did you get quite a bit of playing time, or did you not get as much?
They did. Obviously back then you had the 6-play rule, so I was guaranteed six
Six
plays.
plays,
So I was
right.
excited to get my 6 plays, but I did play a lot more defensively. Again, I felt like I was always behind my brother and Jason. They were a couple years ahead of me. But besides that, I played bare minimum maybe the first year.
Right.
It wasn't until the second year when I was able to play a lot more.
Right.
And we had a couple good teams. After my first year, the second and third year in the Pee Wees, I mean, we ended up going to the regionals and almost to the national finals.
Right.
Which was a good experience for us.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, you probably got to play with your brother that first year, correct?
Yeah,
Because
I
you were
did.
only 2 years apart.
Yeah, we were
and,
2 years apart.
So he was 11 at the time. So
Yeah.
I mean, did that help you a little bit as far as like, going to practice and stuff, and knowing you had a brother who was a good player? And
Yeah.
I mean, did it help ease the transition?
It did. I mean, they helped me. I mean, of course, there was a little hazing there, between him,
Right.
my brother and all his friends. I was the little guy on the block, and
Right.
now it was their turn to pick on the little guy. But I don't look at it as a negative thing. Always looked at it
Right.
as something positive. It helped me because by the time I had my chance, I was more than ready. So. But that was a great year, and besides playing with that 1 year, I didn't play with my brother and those guys that I was friends with until
sophomore year.
until my sophomore year
Right.
when they were seniors. So yeah, those were great years.
And what was interesting about your brother's team? That group of kids. Your brother Jay, Joey Martin, Hyder, all those guys. They only lost to Ansonia one time in their whole career, counting Pop Warner and
Yeah.
everything. So I mean, they had a great deal of success against Ansonia. I mean, those kids, they just knew how to win. I mean, they really did.
You know, I think the main thing that a lot of people forget is the camaraderie. I mean, all those guys went through the whole Pop Warner system, the 5 years, and they went all through high school together. All of them. I'm talking, out of the 25 seniors on that team, I think 16 of them played Pop Warner together.
Right.
You know, you don't see that a lot nowadays.
Especially with the weight classes and stuff like that.
It's broken up so much now. I'm not saying it's a negative thing. I think when I was 9 playing against 11 and 12-year-olds, you know, there was a disadvantage. But, you know, again, I looked at it more as a positive. It helped me, you know, become stronger and better as a player. A lot of kids now would probably get discouraged with that. But, you know, again, I was so excited, you know, to play back then. Like I said, very fortunate, very fortunate.
Right. So now let's talk about your second season in Pop Warner. You mentioned your brother had moved up, as did, you know, a lot of the guys. I would assume that year you got a lot more playing time, and you had that first year under your belt. So did you feel a little more comfortable the second time around?
Absolutely. Felt a lot more comfortable. I had the year under my belt, as you mentioned, and you know, we had a good team. We had a lot of good guys that were coming back for their second year. We had some guys in their second and their third year, you know, coming in. So, I mean, we ended up going to the divisional finals that year, which we lost to Ansonia by a touchdown. And, you know, it helped us prepare for the following year, you know, to win the regionals and almost get to play for a national championship.
Right.
You know, my third year. So, I mean, those were great years. You know, like I said, I still remember like it was yesterday.
And I believe, you know, my math may be off, but I believe the third year was also the year Derby won their first state title with the varsity. They also got over that hump against Ansonia. So a lot of great things in Derby that year, you know, with the Pop Warner team and then with the football team. So, I mean, you had to just, you know, be in awe of Derby in general.
Yeah, that was a great year. You know, especially watching them win a state championship, and then we had our opportunity. I think it was like a week or two later. We went up to Massachusetts. We played Londonderry for the regional championship after beating, I think, Cranston, Rhode Island, in Rhode Island 2 weeks prior. And yeah, we got beat pretty good that day. But we were one game actually away from playing for a national title.
Right.
And like I said, we thought we would transform, and then the following year, once we got into junior midgets, that we would continue that success. But it doesn't always work out that way.
Right.
So.
Now, let me ask you, you know, we'll get, again, like I said, especially in part 2, we'll talk about your class, but were you able to play with some of those guys? Were you able to play with Dave Bizzato and Greg Maliska and, you know, I'm sure Eric Willania played some Pop Warner as well. I mean, were you able to play with those guys at a young age, Claudia Mendez, all those guys?
Yeah, Claudio wasn't there yet. George Hay wasn't there. I remember just Dave Bizzato, Greg Maliska, Sean Bittman.
Right.
You know, he was there. That was pretty much it. A lot of
Mike
other guys.
Massey
Mike Massey played a few years, and then, you know, he was sporadic. You know, around that time, Eric, you know, he was more involved in baseball and basketball.
And you guys had a lot of kids that didn't come back to the program when you were in high school. That, you know, would have been a big help. So I mean, there was a lot of talent probably in Pop Warner.
We did. We did. You know, we lost about 8 or 9 guys. You know, in a small town, that hurts. You know, especially, you know, there was a couple really good athletes. You know, again, I mention his name all the time. You know, Eric Willania. You know, we tried to get him to stay. You know, my father played with his father.
Right.
So we tried to get him to stay, but he, you know, he ended up going private.
Right.
And a lot of the guys, a couple of the guys went private, and some guys went technical. You know, we lost 8 guys. You know, that hurt. You know, going into high school. You know, that's why. Once I got into my freshman year, we had such low numbers. We had to bring in 7th and 8th graders that maybe couldn't make the weight, you know, playing midget football, and we took them in.
Right.
So.
Now let me ask you this. As I mentioned, you were good at the other sports too. You know, I can remember, and I'll talk about it a little more, but I can remember you being on the freshman basketball team, and I mean, there was one time you guys are scrimmaging, I believe the JVs, and you're just hitting every shot. Every shot you took, you hit, and you're a very good baseball player. Did you play those sports, though, more to try to stay fresh for football? I mean, did you enjoy playing those sports, or was it more to, like, kind of keep yourself active?
I did. You know, I enjoyed basketball, you know, playing at a parochial school. You know, I had John Mulaney as my coach, along with Charlie Stockmore. I mean, 2 great basketball coaches. I learned a lot from them. So, you know, that transformed once I got into high school. So I did enjoy playing basketball, and, you know, I enjoyed the intensity. but football, obviously, like I said before,
Right.
was my first love. I mean, so I enjoy playing sports, all three of them, but football was my main focus.
Right.
Once I came to play for Derby.
Right. And I mentioned that Little League team when you played on the A's. I mean, you talk about so many great athletes that you played with on that team.
Yeah.
Jimmy Gregorio,
Yeah.
George Hay was on that team.
Yeah.
I believe Steve Lightham, who was a great baseball pitcher.
Yeah,
You
Steve.
And I'm sure I'm missing a couple guys, but I mean, and Joe Lees, I believe, even played a year with you guys on
Yeah, he
that
did.
team. So I mean, Derby had so much talent in every sport at the time. I mean, that was really like just a who's who of athletes in Derby. It was a real good time to be a part of Derby back then.
Yeah, we did. And I know one year, I think it was my last year, we had a good chance. I mean, it was me, Ben Bartone, Eric Wilania
In the All-Stars,
in the
yes.
All-Stars. I mean, and Pete Krasinowski was on
Right.
that team as well. I mean, we had a really good team, and we were one game short.
Right.
you
I think
know.
Lenny Fletcher.
Yeah,
as well.
we had a couple really good athletes on that team, and we were one game away of going to the regionals, and we lost. I forget who we lost. It might have been Newington, one of those teams, but yeah, we were close. And same thing. Once we got into high school, we had a couple good teams. I think my sophomore year, we made it to the playoffs.
Right.
And then my junior year, obviously, we won it.
Right.
So, but it's tough. Baseball and football is total different spectrum.
Yeah.
It's tough to, they tried to bring the intensity into baseball, but that was more, hand-eye,
Right.
being patient.
And the thing of it is, with baseball, it's a team sport, but at the same time, there's no X's and O's really.
No.
You have to be able to hit. You have to be able to pitch.
Yeah.
Field. It's a lot different than say football and basketball, where a lot of times it's X's and O's and strategy and things like. Not that baseball isn't, but
No.
it's more it's more of a thinking game in baseball than
Yeah.
anything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So let me ask you. Let's fast forward a little bit to your 8th grade year. You're in 8th grade now, and I believe were you on the midgets that year by then?
Yeah, I was on the midgets.
So you probably had Jimmy Mascola.
Yeah,
as your coach?
Jimmy Mascola was my head coach. Again, we had a really good season. I think we only had like 2 losses that year. I think we went into the Shelton game with 1 loss, chance to go to the playoffs.
Right.
Obviously, we ended up losing that game, but that was a great year. I enjoyed playing for Jimmy Mascola. He was a great coach, a great guy. He helped me.
I loved Derby a lot.
Yeah, he helped all 5 years, and that was the thing I remember the most about my Pop Warner years is we had just a lot of help from a lot of the families. There was it was very positive. They were very helpful. Again, I can't say enough about Nick Rizzio and Barry McDermott. I mean, I had those guys for 3 years. I learned more in those 3 years than I probably did in all my 9 years playing it for Derby.
Right.
I mean, they were nothing to take away from any other coaches, but I learned a lot from those guys. I can't tell you how many times I sat down with Barry, just talking, football. He was talking about when he played, and I learned a lot. I really engulfed myself around the whole program, and what better to learn from Nick Rizzio and Barry McDermott.
Right. And you mentioned Barry. Barry, wasn't the biggest kid in the world either when he played, but I mean, he was such a hard-nosed, and he loved Derby football. Barry was the type of guy that he wanted everybody to play hurt.
Yeah.
He felt like unless you were injured, if you were just hurt, you could get back out there.
Yeah.
That's how he kind of did his style, and he would end up coaching with Coach Carbone in Hamden for a while.
Yeah.
So I mean, he really loved Derby. If you talk about a person that loved Derby, Barry definitely did.
He did. Yeah, he's definitely sorely missed. I remember he passed a couple years when I was in college, and come back, I was devastated.
Right.
Yeah, he was definitely one of my mentors, no doubt, along with Jimmy Mascola and Nick Rizzio. Growing up.
Right.
Great guys.
Right. So now you enter high school, and you're on the freshman team, and I believe Tommy D'Onofrio and Andy Mancini were your coaches freshman year.
Yeah.
Maybe Buff Bartone.
Yeah. Buff Bartone, Tommy D'Onofrio. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I believe Andy came in maybe right before the season to help out.
Right.
Yeah, but Tommy was the head coach.
And I believe Eric Wilania was the quarterback that year, correct?
Yeah, that year he came into Derby. He played football, first time ever playing. Finally got him to come out, and what a great year he had. I mean, he was just he had that natural ability. I mean, he was really good at basketball and baseball, but I mean, he was just an all-around great athlete. Having him on our team, I mean, he won 2 or 3 games single-handedly by himself. I just knew if he was going to stay in Derby, I knew we were going to win 2 or 3 state championships with him alone, and not just in football and baseball as well,
right.
and possibly in basketball, maybe turning that program around as well. because when he ended up going to Notre Dame, I think they won a state championship, but he was all-state in basketball and baseball.
Right, and his brother was a real good player as well.
Yeah, his brother was playing for the
Allen.
Twins. Yeah,
right.
His brother was playing for the Minnesota Twins. He went to Notre Dame to the university after going in West Haven. But yeah, they were great athletes, and just to lose him,
Right.
it cost us. And not to fast forward ahead, but I remember, when Ben got hurt my junior year. If we had Eric, just
Right.
that one player, he steps right in. You look at my sophomore year when Joey Martin got hurt, Ben was able to step in.
Right.
When my brother got hurt, I was able to step in.
Right.
We had, capable athletes to step in those positions. But, when you lose someone of that caliber, it's tough to replace.
Right.
Especially in a small town like Derby. You lose one or two players like that, it can cost you winning a state championship. And it was evident that it did with us.
Right. So let me ask you about the freshman team that year. I believe you guys went 5-4, maybe 6-3.
Yep.
You didn't have Dave Bizzato that year. I believe he went to Notre Dame, correct?
St. Joe's.
Or St. Joe's,
Yeah, he was at St.
So you
Joe's.
didn't have Dave Bizzato.
No.
I think Massey came out that year for the freshman team.
He did.
Right. You also had Joe Leza come out as a 7th grader.
Yeah.
I believe Mike Pride came out as an 8th grader.
Yep, Mike Pride was there.
And you had like a talented group of kids, but you also had a lot of kids that played for the first time. I don't think Rick Kovacs had ever played
Never
before.
played.
Right.
Dimitri
Right,
Anufiavis.
Right, had never played
Never
before.
played.
So you had a lot of new kids. Let me ask you this. One of the things I wanted to ask you, you talked about Eric Melania. Did you always think, and I know you probably weren't crazy about it, but did you always think, I'm going to end up having to be the quarterback someday as I get into my career? I mean,
Yes.
Did you think running back wasn't going to be in the future for you?
At first, yes, because all through Pop Warner, I was always a receiver, always played quarterback. So I just assumed, but I mean, I definitely wanted to play running back.
Right.
I mean, growing up, watching the, Jim Steppen, watching the Jeff Rice, watching Jimmy Lewis, watching Bobby Orgiano,
Right.
all these great running backs. I said to myself, that's what I want to do. That's how I'm going to be able to contribute when it's my time to play, in the program.
Right.
And yeah, there was some doubts. Not saying that playing quarterback wouldn't be a good thing, but back then as opposed to now, quarterback wasn't really ideal. You were just going to sit there and hand off the ball
Right.
to the running back. I mean, if I was to play quarterback today, I would choose playing quarterback.
Right. It's funny you said that, and we'll get into it more. But Charlie DeCenza, when I had him on, he had talked about how he decided to go with Steve Tilkey your senior year instead of you. But he always said, if I knew what I know now about spreads, I could have probably had Dave be the quarterback.
Absolutely.
So it's just crazy how the game has changed a lot. I mean, are you a fan of how the game has changed, or are you a little disappointed?
No, I mean, it's just, I enjoy defense. It's just, I do enjoy the 3 yards of cloud of dust. But I mean, I have nothing negative to say about the spread offense. But that's just the way I was brought up.
Right.
I like getting down in the trenches. The spread, it's tough to defend. I think now, if I had to defend that, I don't think I'd be able to go both ways.
Right.
And be able to sustain that all 4 quarters.
Yeah, because I mean, you're constantly moving.
Yeah.
There's really no rest period.
No.
I mean, the game's so fast paced now. So freshman year, like I said, you guys I think won 5 or 6 games, had a winning season. Your class though was always kind of looked at as maybe it's not going to be a good Derby class. They necessarily don't have the most skilled players. But one thing you could see too, even when you guys were freshmen, is maybe a 5-4 record isn't what is acceptable in Derby, but you guys grinded out wins. Every win you got that year was a grind. I believe you beat Seymour that year. I think you beat Cheshire. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, we beat Cheshire.
Right.
I mean, obviously, we lost to Ansonia and Shelton, our 2 other rivals. We lost to Brantford pretty good. I mean, Brantford had a big team. They came down with 80 kids. We only had maybe like 18.
Right.
They beat us up pretty good. But I think the one thing that stood out that year is I remember when we beat Lyman Hall pretty good, and the coach came over and was like, you're going to have a good senior class in a few years. And Tommy D'Onofrio was laughing and was like, no, he goes, we only got like 4 freshmen. All the rest of these guys are 7th and 8th graders. I mean, the coach couldn't believe it because he had sophomores and freshmen playing on his team. I mean, back then, your freshman football team, you can bring sophomores in if they weren't playing, junior varsity. So, we thought that was fun.
Right. So let me ask you, as a freshman that year, you're watching your brother John and Jason. They're both in the backfield. Derby didn't have a good year that year for them. They went 6-4. But I mean, Johnny and Jason had a great year running the ball. And the thing about your brother John is he could do everything. I mean, he was so dangerous because he was a great running back, but he was, you can make an argument that he could catch the ball better than anybody. And screen passes, he was amazing with. Tell me how much. I mean, was he your biggest fan watching as a Derby player, your brother John?
Oh yeah, no doubt. I think my brother, and I always sound biased when I say it, but I still believe, he was one of probably the best dual threats ever in Derby. I mean, besides, you want to make an argument with Chris King, because he played quarterback. My brother didn't play quarterback, but what was interesting with my brother is, he was 5 yards he can get all the time, and then when defense started to collapse, he would throw the ball over your head for a touchdown. And then if that was the case, then he would go out in the backfield and catch the ball out of the backfield.
Right.
So, I mean, he was a dual threat. And then having Jason up the middle, kind of would collapse defenses to open things up for him. I mean, they really complemented each other back then. And then you want to add in Joey Martin, later on, I still believe he should have been quarterback there all 3 years, in my opinion. But, there was other, seniors that, that played in front of him, and he waited his time, and he made the best of it when he did have his opportunity. But that my brother's junior year, that was a great football team. I mean, they lost a couple close games.
Right.
They had a few injuries.
Unfortunately, a lot of those teams were good that year. Brantford had a crazy season, as did Cheshire, as we know. I always look at that North Haven game, though. North Haven was 8-0, and Derby knocked them off.
Yeah.
That was a huge win. The Seymour game that year as well. Yeah. They're down 14-0 or 15-0.
Yeah, they came
back. They had some big victories that year, but you just always felt like there were those couple games they just couldn't, scratch out the win. But I mean, did you think that going into your brother's senior year they were going to be as good as they were?
Yeah, I think the conditioning part had something to do with it.
Right.
I think later on in the season, you can tell a lot of, not just my brother and Jason, they were getting gas, and teams were coming back and just finishing them off.
Right.
So that was something that we needed to just crack down on. And again, that I think that summer or that spring, my father said, he took it upon himself to say, you know what, you guys need to get into great shape. If you're going to play both ways and you're going to have a chance to win a state championship, this is what you need to do.
Right.
And we did. We worked out every day, 6 days a week for about 9 weeks before the season.
Right.
So I think once the season came, I mean, we were in great shape. And it wasn't just my brother and I and Jason. There was probably 10, 11 other guys that either, if they weren't playing AAU baseball during that summer, they would be running with us.
Right.
Especially the linemen. I mean, you look at those films, with Pat McMahon, Jeff Sullivan, Dave Chevrolet, Doug Seibart. Those guys weren't just cracking down and blocking. I mean, they would be getting up the field, hitting linebackers and safeties. And I think a lot of it had to do with it was with the conditioning that summer when they all made a pact that they weren't going to lose. Because the year before, I thought that '89 team was a better team than the 1990 team.
Well, that '89 team looked like a state championship team. It really did. There were some injuries too, which you never want to make excuses, but it does play a part. Mike Giannetti got hurt, and he wasn't able to be that third back that they could have used. Things like that. And nobody really killed them that year, but they just, you talk about the Ansonia game. A huge fumble and late in the third quarter, sealed that game. But it was 14-7. For quite some time. It was even 7-7 at one point. And that was a great Ansonia team that year.
It was. They had a chance to win that game. I think my brother threw an interception, which he's not going to like when I say that, but he should have just tucked it in and ran. He threw the interception at his own 5-yard line, and that gave him a touchdown before the half. I think if the score was 7-7.5 as opposed to 14-7, you're talking a totally different game. And then what you mentioned before with the fumble, they were going in to score to tie the game.
Right.
And then they returned it for a long touchdown, and that deflated them. After that, it was pretty much over. But.
Right. And with a team like Ansonia, you could only make so many mistakes before they capitalize on it. They have such great coaching that
they do.
There's only so much you could do. So let me ask you this: the season comes to an end. You decide to play basketball that year, as I mentioned. I think you played for Lou Cesaroni.
Yep.
And you had a great year at basketball, but it'd probably be your final year. Was it just you wanted to dedicate yourself to football?
Yeah, more working out. You know, basketball. I mean, they really weren't that good. You know, so it was tough to get motivated.
Right.
You know, and then I wanted to dedicate more time of getting in better shape. You know, to play football. You know, especially going into my junior year. I mean, the guys, they wanted me to play. I felt bad, but you know, my number one goal was obviously win a state championship. You know, watching it at a young age.
Right.
You know, you crave it, you want it, and that's what, you know, especially when, you know, playing, as you talked, my freshman year, we were only 5-4. We only had a couple players. I remember Coach Senzo pulling me in, you know, saying, you know, Davey, you know, you only got like 3 or 4. You're only gonna have 3 or 4 seniors. I mean,
Right.
you got to start recruiting, you know, some of these kids. You know, which we did. You know, we ended up getting a couple of the guys, but I mean, we were small. You know,
Right.
we didn't have a big class.
And you know, interestingly, and we're going to get into it in a sec, but your sophomore year, a lot of those guys did not play sophomore
No.
year. I don't think Dimitri
No.
played. I don't think Massey played that
Nope.
year. So, I mean, there were quite a few kids who didn't come out that year for
No.
whatever reason. You know,
Yeah.
I think sometimes kids, they get a little intimidated by the
Sure.
fact that, you know, they're going to be the new kid on the block, things like that. And they also think they're not going to play a lot. So it's hard to keep them motivated. But I remember as your sophomore year, you really didn't have a lot of kids come out sophomore year.
No. I think the only guys we had come out, we had Sean Bittman, George Hay, but he ended up breaking his leg in a scrimmage,
Right.
so he was out for the year. Claudio Mendez, you know, blew his knee out. He was out as along with
Right.
Greg Maliska. You know, it's funny. I remember when Coach Senzo one day wanted to talk to, you know, the underclassmen, and he's going through. Maybe there was like 15 or 16 juniors. And he's like, you know, all right, what do we got for the sophomores? I was the only person that raised my hand. I was the only one
Right.
suited up at that time.
Yeah.
And you know, he brought me in his office, and he was like, you know, you have to start getting these kids to come out. He goes, you can't be the only guy your senior year.
Right.
You know, it's a team sport. You need to get people to come out.
Right, and DeCenzo was big on that. He would always tell his new group, get these kids out. We need more people out. So let me ask you this: as a sophomore, you're on that team, and you know you're not going to probably play as much as you like on the varsity level, but you
Right.
played plenty of JV.
Right, JV.
But just talk about that magical season, just as someone who, you know, again, your brother was one of the big contributors.
He
just
was.
talk about that 90 team a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great season. I mean, those guys worked really hard. You know, I had a ringside seat to it. I had an opportunity to play, you know, but Coach Senzo back then, which he made a vow, and I remember a couple of times we had meetings when we tried to bring kids into the program. If you play all 4 years in the program, you will play.
Right.
You know, and I had 3 other seniors ahead of me as the other wing back. I mean, I was able to get playing time, but in the whole scheme of things, you know, Coach Senzo decided to play, you know, Mike Smetana, Rich Scaife,
Right.
all the seniors, which rightfully so. Back then, it was upsetting because I did work hard. I felt I was better than those guys.
Right.
But it was all about winning. You know, it didn't matter if I was playing, if Mike Smetana was playing, Rich Scaife. You know, I mean, I was able to get a lot of playing time, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of that team. My brother was a big integral part of it.
Right.
Along with Jason and Joe Martin, a lot of guys. I mean, that was probably the best team with a total team effort that I've
When you
ever
think
seen.
about that team, and I've mentioned it a lot, you had so many heroes every game.
Yeah.
You know, whether it was Brian Marcuscio in the Ansonia game, Scott Ezzo in the North Haven game, as well as the Lyman Hall game, making the picks. Then, you know, you had a guy like, you know, you mentioned Mike Smetana. You guys were having trouble against Amity getting in the end zone. He makes a big touchdown catch. You know, and Rich Scaife, who maybe didn't carry the ball a lot, but he did a good job going in and out and doing what he had to do. And I look at a kid like Doug Sayabart, who was a quiet kid, but he was a heck of a blocker.
He was.
You know, and I mean, you just had, and Rob Hyder, you know, all these guys, they all did whatever they were asked to do. And there was, you know, the same thing with your brother and Jay. A lot of times Jay may get the yards, your brother would get the touchdowns, but neither one was upset about that. They were going to do whatever they could to help the team win.
And they did. I mean, they had such a great nucleus, those guys. I mean, they really got along. They played well. There was no selfishness. You know, a lot of times, you know, my brother and I will sit and talk and we'll laugh. You know, he would get the ball from 20 to 20 down inside the 5, make, you know, 6 or 7 great plays, and then, you know, Jay would get like a 1-yard touchdown run.
Yeah.
You know, we would joke about that, and vice versa. You know, there was a couple times Jay would make big runs, and then he'd give the ball to my brother on the 1-yard line. He'd leap over and score. You know, and we joke around about that. But yeah, that was a great year. You know, a lot of people, they don't realize. I mean, Joey Martin only played, I think, 8 or 9 games that year, and he had 11 interceptions.
Right.
I mean, he was great defensively, but offensively, I mean, he was another person that was a dual threat.
Well, he could do everything.
He can do everything. If he wasn't handing off, I mean, people would really lock down. I think towards middle of the season, they were really locking down on Jason and my brother. And then now we had Joey faking either running or throwing the ball downfield. I mean, teams just couldn't stop that offense towards the end of the year. And it's just it's a testament to their character and what they put into it, during the off season. I firmly believe if they didn't put that time in the off season, I think a couple of those close games maybe wouldn't have went their way.
Right.
But playing with my brother, that year was great. Being able to watch him, trying to emulate how he played because he was such a dual threat. I mean, every time they would stop him running the ball, he would throw a halfback, either a screen double pass or a halfback pass. Yeah. Then if they were playing deep, and once they seen what they were trying to do, then he'd come out of the backfield and catch the ball. Yeah. I mean, he was unbelievable.
And he was the type of guy too. He was always known for doing a flip into the end zone to get in the end zone. I mean, he was not afraid to put his body on the line. And I always look at the Ansonia game. Brian, he's always going to be the big story of that game, and he deserves that.
Absolutely.
But there were 2 key plays as well in that game. Your brother comes up with a big interception late in the game as Ansonia's driving. Sharkey had just made a big run.
Yep.
You guys stopped him all day, and then he finally broke free. And then, of course, Ansonia is about to get the ball back. It's 3rd and 8, and your brother gets the first down. He seals the game. So, I mean, little things like that sometimes may get unnoticed. He was the type of player that would do things like that.
Yeah, the intangibles were, with him were unbelievable. I mean, he made so many plays that have gone unnoticed that you talk about. I mean, defensively, I mean, you forget. I mean, they always talk about him being a great offensive player, being a dual threat.
Right.
But defensively, I mean, he was a great defensive back. I mean, I don't think there was one receiver that ever gone past him and scored a touchdown. I mean, and then he would play up and stop runs as well. I mean, he was the complete package.
What's funny about him too is he was a very quiet kid. Like, he didn't do a lot of yelling on the field. He kind of just played the game, and he was, loud by the way he played. He didn't necessarily yell a lot or things like that some players do. But, man, I mean, if you talk about guys you want with the ball, and, if you got to get into that end zone, you want Johnny with the ball.
Yeah, no doubt. He was definitely he would make the big play when you needed it. And like I said, in the Seymour game, early on, when he threw the screen double pass
to Scotty
Ezzo, I mean, that was right before the half. That pretty much put them away.
Right.
I mean, you look back, Jason had a couple good runs up the middle. I mean, that game they were keying my brother constantly, and that opened up things in the middle
for Jason, right?
So then once they started to stop Jason up the middle, then my brother started getting some success on the outside. Then when they started stopping him on the outside, then he throws a double pass. I mean, and then when they did that, then you had Joey Martin rolling out, running the ball for first downs or throwing the ball downfield. I mean, like I said, that team was the complete package offensively.
Just an enjoyable team to watch.
It was.
Now let's talk a little bit about the state championship game, because one of the things that had to be special for you and John is you both scored in that game. I think John scored the 4th touchdown or the 5th one, and you scored the 6th one. So it was back-to-back Anroman brothers. And one of the things I always remember, when you scored your touchdown, John came running out and he lifted you up. So, it had to be a good feeling, number one, to score in the state championship game, and number 2, to have your brother right there being the first one to congratulate you.
Yeah, that was a special moment. I think everything just culminated into that one moment. We knew that the season was coming to an end. We knew we weren't going to play with each other anymore. That was the end of it. And to seal it with a touchdown, beating them, 41-0. Knowing that we were just about to be crowned number 1 in the state. Reaching the top, achievement.
Right.
It all came together. And then for us to embrace like that, I mean, it was very special. It's something that I'll never forget the rest of my life.
Right, it really was. Now, as far as, you mentioned a lot of your class didn't go out that year, but you had a very good JV year. I believe you were JV Player of the Year, correct?
Yep.
That had to be a great feeling when the coaches, when your name got announced at the Albarella banquet that you were JV Player of the Year. Talk about that JV team. How did you think you did that year? I mean, obviously you were Player of the Year, but were you satisfied with your season?
Sure. Yeah, we had a good JV season. I think at one time we were undefeated, and I think Andy Mancini was coaching over at Amity, and that's one of the stories I remember. And we went in, we were undefeated. I think they had a couple losses, and they ended up tying us. and they, we tied them, and then we lost to Shelton at the end of the year. But we did have we enjoyed a good season. I just think it just springboarded off the varsity team doing so well. It just, everything matriculated down where, the JVs did well. Even the freshman team that year did very well.
Yes. They beat Ansonia.
They beat Ansonia.
Right?
They won. They beat Shelton. They won a lot of big games. So, I mean, overall, that season was a great year. All around. So.
Right. So now going into junior year, you're going to be the man in the backfield. It's going to be you, John Paquet, and I believe Gary Lucarelli or maybe Marco Brito.
Yeah, they were switching. Yeah, they were rotating in.
Dave, I look at the Trinity Catholic game. That was a scary game. It looked like you guys were going to lose that game, and it was 21-20 late in the game, and I think you broke free for 70 yards and sealed the game. I mean, that was a great first game for you in the sense that, I had my brother's gone now. I've got to do the job. How did that feel, that first game, getting that touchdown at the end?
It was good. Early on, I had a touchdown early on in the game. They were shutting us down offensively. They had a big defensive line and a really good inside linebacker. Then I was able to free up. I think I almost had 100 yards receiving that game as well. Yeah. So I was able to come out of the backfield. But yeah, to finally get where I wanted to get, ever since I was 7 years old. Now it's my time. And then now it's the first game of the season, and we're almost going to lose. It was an eye opener.
Right, and I mean, it looked. I think it was a third down, and you guys were going to punt if you didn't get the first down, and you just broke it free. And again, that was a scary game because I think going into that game, you guys thought you were probably going to win that easily. Trinity Catholic didn't really have a reputation as a good football program.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was a great first win and a great first game for you as a starter in the backfield. Let's fast forward a little bit. Seymour game, there were so many what-ifs in that game. And you had a great game as well, 2 touchdowns. I think you caught a pass as well for a touchdown. But I always look at that touchdown Seymour got right before the half. And that kind of really broke your backs because you guys weren't really able to do much in the second half.
No.
I mean, it just seemed like, I brought this up to Ben Bartone, it just seemed like that year where the 90 team, everything that could go right went right. Everything that went wrong for you guys went wrong because Don Buono plays this great game against Cheshire. You have all these guys step up. I think Jeff Robinson had to fill in for you because you were hurt.
I was hurt.
And you guys are ahead the whole game, and then Cheshire scores late. They win the game. And obviously the Sheehan game, that was a backbreaker. Talk about that team a little bit. I mean, do you really believe if Ben doesn't get hurt, you guys probably win 7 games at least?
Yes, Ben and I talked about that, and I got hurt as well. You're talking.
You missed 2 games.
I missed. I missed. Yeah, Ben, we lose him for the season. Then I come in at quarterback, in the same game, 2 plays later, I blow my knee out. I ended up finishing the game.
Right.
We ended up winning against North Haven. That was another scare. 10-2.
Yeah.
I ended up missing the game against Cheshire for a week. I mean, they basically, when I got the MRI back, I mean, they wanted me to pretty much sit out the rest of the year.
Right.
And I was not doing that. So I went to therapy every day. I was able to come back 7 days later.
And you were having trouble walking too. I mean, for like a good week or 2, it was hurting every time
Couldn't
you
walked.
walked.
Couldn't even walk. Yeah. But luckily, I was able to go to therapy every day for a good 5 days. I think I only practiced 2 days the following week, which was good because we were only playing East Haven. But they always played us tough. Not saying, not diminishing anything against East Haven back then, but we knew it was a game that we were going to win, which we did. So I was able to come back and transition slowly. And then, obviously, try to play against Ansonia at quarterback because Charlie, didn't want me to play much as at running back because I was still hurt.
Right.
But eventually I switched back to running back, for the remainder of the season. But I was never 100%. But I firmly believe if I don't get hurt and Ben doesn't get hurt, not saying with 2 of us, we wouldn't win a state championship, but there was 3 games we lost by a few without us. I think if we're in that lineup, we easily win 7 or 8 games. I firmly believe that. But this is where I go back to what I said before, Mike. You lose a few guys to private schools or technical schools.
Yes.
I mentioned Eric Wilania before. If we have half of those guys that left, they fill that void. Ben gets hurt, Eric steps in. I get hurt. Another guy.
Because in fairness to Dominic Buono, he was an emergency quarterback.
Yeah, he didn't play quarterback.
I don't think anybody could blame him. I think he did as good a job as he could do.
He did.
And he did what the coaches asked him to do. But he was put in such a tough position. you know.
Yeah, to become the quarterback and to become, possibly the leader of the team when you never played quarterback, and to do as well as he did. I mean, that just showed, it was just a testament to his character. He played with a lot of heart. And here's another guy that went through the whole system, was able to have his opportunity. Maybe wasn't a great athlete, but he did really well, and you can't take that away from him. I mean, like, again, we're 2 or 3 plays of still going 7-4, 6-5 that year with him as a starting quarterback.
Right.
And with Ben and I hurt, so I tip my hat off to him. I mean, I always look back and I say, definitely we're not a 5-6 team.
Right.
And that hurt. And I think that really, set things up going into my senior year.
Right.
Because now we had really no one coming to my senior year. So now, it was really scary. Now I'm saying to myself, now growing up, watching all these great Derby teams, and now it's my chance to put my, stamp, be playing in the program, and now here I am, I can possibly walk away with 2 losing seasons, the first losing season of 26 years, and then walking away my senior year possibly maybe being one of the worst teams of all time.
Right.
So it was nerve-wracking.
Right. So let me ask you, the off season comes, and you can remember that first meeting. Charlie was very annoyed. I don't think I ever saw Charlie that mad as he was. He said, we have to get this back, and he basically put everybody on notice that if you're not going to be dedicated, I'm not playing you. You better be dedicated. Along with Sean Bittman and George Hay, you get elected captain, and Dave, you probably expected to be captain, but at the same time, it had to be a great feeling when your name was announced, because so many great Derby players over the years, and now you're elected captain. That had to be a great feeling.
It was. It's just from all the hard work. I just, my only thing to take a step back, I wish I took more of a leadership role my junior year. But Coach Asenzo always emphasized on it's the seniors' responsibility. It's their team.
Right.
They they need to step up. Not saying guys that were seniors didn't. But that was one of my regrets, that I wasn't able to become more vocal and step up to be that leader. But to go into my senior year and they all elected me as captain, I was humbled, and I was determined to win and to bring Derby back to where they should be, which we should have never left them where we were the year before. Again, the injuries plagued us, and I can't tell you how many prayers I said, not get hurt again going into my senior year.
Right.
So,
Dave, obviously your mind was on football, but I believe Coach DeFrancisco said, I need you to come out for baseball. I believe you were a right fielder for the team. And I think you were a little hesitant. You weren't sure you wanted to, because you wanted to focus on football, but he sold you on it. And I mean, as a player for the, for the football team your sophomore year, again, you didn't see a lot of action. Now you're on the starting team of a team that wins the championship. How great of a feeling was it to win that state title in baseball? And you really stepped up a lot that year when they needed you to.
Yeah, you're right. I was reluctant to play. I wanted to focus mainly on football, but I owed it to those guys.
Right.
I was good friends with them. I was in the trenches with them. I felt their pain, and they were determined. Right. And so I wanted to be a part of that. So I kind of put football aside for a moment and dedicate my time.
And you missed Springs that year.
Missed Springs.
Yeah.
But I want to dedicate my time with them, because I was good friends with them. I grew up with Ben, Gino. I was good, best friends with these guys.
Right.
And to see how they were being labeled just didn't sit well with me. So so I decided to play, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Playing with those guys, winning. I mean, I was a small part. Ben, Gino, Don Shepard, I mean, they were, and Joey Lisa, he had a hell of a freshman year. But they were an integral part of that team, and I was glad to be a part of it and win a state title with them.
Right. Dave, one of the funniest stories I read in Steve Riley's book is when they beat Cheshire, everybody signed the ball, I believe, for D or tools, and you put your football number, and they all joke about that. D to this day still jokes. He's like, I never understood why he did that, but it just showed that in your mind, you were number 48, and that's how you felt. And 48 wasn't available when you played baseball. I mean, football never really left your mind, even though you're playing baseball at that point. I'm sure when you were in right field, sometimes you're thinking about, how are we going to win in senior year here? Yeah,
I mean, there was a lot of positions that were going to be open. There was just a lot of question marks. I didn't sleep well. I mean, the only thing that took my mind off it was playing baseball.
Right.
But in the back of my mind, I go home that night, I'm thinking to myself, who's going to play quarterback? If I play quarterback, who's going to be running back?
Right.
There was just so many question marks, and it didn't look good.
Right.
We needed a spark. We needed something.
And a lot of things were going on. Nobody knew if Charlie was going to be the head coach because the principal job was coming into play. People knew Angelini was going to retire. The other thing is too, with this team, is you didn't know who was going to come out. You didn't know what seniors you were going to have, and you knew you were going to have a lot of first-year players. And I say that meaning that first-year starters.
Right.
So it was really going to be a young team. And you think about so many things that went into it. I mean, Mr. Alu's wife passes away.
Yeah.
I think the day before the first day of practice.
First day of practice, she
Springs.
passed.
Yeah. So I mean, there were just so many things going into that season. That we're going to get into it in part 2. But you could really write a book about that season.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of trials and tribulations that year, that's for sure. Again, everything just worked out. I mean, I just think, I look back and I said, we were like 3 or 4 plays of winning it all.
Right.
And you look back and it's like we're like the forgotten team. You look back at the '87 team. I mean they were a few plays away. I mean they were 9-1,
right,
and they didn't even make the playoffs. I couldn't believe.
Team. I mean,
even the '88 team, they were 8-2. I mean you put the format is now. I mean all those teams get in and they probably win state championships. We win 5 or 6 in a row. But yeah, it was a good time.
One of the things I think was the key though, Dave, is captain's practice. You started it right after, I believe the last day of school might have been June 23rd, and you started it that Monday. You didn't waste any time. And talk about your father, Dave, because sometimes he goes unnoticed at how hard he worked with these kids, because he didn't just help your class or your brother's class. When you guys graduated, he stayed on and he helped the other teams. Talk about how good he was for Derby and getting you guys prepared in the season.
Yeah, he did. I mean, I think it started after the '89 season where he just had enough. He knew the potential,
right,
and we weren't capitalizing on it. So he knew the conditioning part of it, knowing that a lot of the guys we've gone both ways, knowing that we've been playing all L schools. We just needed to be ready. So he wanted to be a part of it.
Right.
He wanted to spend more time with us, being, he was my father.
Right.
And those were great times. It wasn't so great when he was running us into the ground.
Right.
I remember, because we lived on the lake, we would have, guys like, my brother and I, George Garland, Todd Hunter, Mike Giannetti, we'd all be at the house, and then, my father would come home at 4 o'clock and we'd go up to the field and run for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So, those were good times. And, and my father stayed on afterwards. He stayed on afterwards and for a few years just to show that he wanted to be a part of the program, and it wasn't just because it was my brother and I.
Right.
So,
and the good thing about him, too, is he didn't really, try to push anybody, with words. He just gave you the workout. This is the workout. Do the workout. And, any advice he could offer, he could. But he basically just gave you guys the workout to do, and he would help any way he could, with anything else. And he was big on, I don't care if he would always ask, how is everybody? He didn't care if you threw up. He wanted to make sure nobody had a muscle pull or anything like that. And he was really enjoyable to be around, and I think the kids really loved, having him there.
He was. And that's why he never coached, Mike. My father coached, at home. We would sit for hours and talk of what I did wrong and what I should have done. And the same thing with my brother. I mean, we learned a lot from him. He was great. I couldn't thank him enough for the time he spent with us during that off season. I firmly believe if he didn't instill those programs during the off season, I don't think we would have the success that we had. And I owe a lot to that to him. And,
right.
But back then, going through those rough days during the summer,
they're tough.
It was hard, and he wasn't particularly nicer to me. Or he pushed me a lot harder.
Right.
Especially after my junior year. I mean, I think my junior year I was probably in better shape than my senior year. I mean, because we were hungry to repeat.
Right.
And it just didn't work out that way. I think it made us more hungrier going into my senior year. But knowing that with the talent we had around us, and like you mentioned before with the young players, coming in, there was a lot of question marks. And then with Charlie possibly stepping down,
right.
There was just so much going on. Then Coach Allo's wife dying, there was a lot going on. We needed something, and I think when Ron Leno stepped on, that was a big part of it. He was an integral part of that team and really helped us because he was a young guy. He was 26 years old coming in to the program, and I think having him in and being a part of the special teams really helped us. And we utilized the special teams to set us up for touchdowns and cutting the field in half. And he emphasized on that, and forever grateful for him to come in and help us. I mean, Ronnie Leno really stepped in and filled that void and that spark that we needed that year to succeed. I firmly believe that.
Right. Well, Dave, we're just getting started. Everybody's going to hear about this special 92 team. I want to thank you for coming on part one. For Dave Anroman, I'm Mike Kenichi. This is Hometown Heroes, and we'll see you in part two. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Kenichi, and welcome to Hometown Heroes.
Rivalry was big during that era because Ansoni always had good teams. And for some odd reason, even when the Ansoni was good, Derby they beat them.
Right.
It was crazy.
Being who I was, Jack's oldest son, at that time, young kid, growing up in that program and watching, it was something that I wanted to do.
And that's when Eddie and I hooked up, and I tell you, I didn't realize it was 24 years that we, when you look back at it.
But I always took a back seat being the basketball coach, and football did their thing because I could see right from the beginning that the people in town were in love with their football program.
Right.
So and plus Boots Jarvis was then the athletic director and the football coach when I started.
So when you came onto the staff, he told you, listen, you're coming in as number 6 coach. If someone leaves, you're going to become number 5, number 4, number 3. And I was coach number 3 because it was Lou, Frank, and myself.